The 2001 insurgency in the Republic of Macedonia was an armed conflict which began when the ethnic Albanian National Liberation Army militant group began attacking the security forces of the Republic of Macedonia at the beginning of February 2001, and ended with the Ohrid Agreement. The goal of the NLA was to separate Republic of Macedonia and make Greater Albania. Already in 1999, there were 234,500 Albanian refugees from Kosovo in Macedonia according to the UNHCR estimates, who accounted for 11.7% of the total population of Macedonia at the time. There were also claims that the group ultimately wished to see Albanian majority areas secede from the country, though high-ranking NLA members have denied this. The conflict lasted throughout most of the year, although overall casualties remained limited to several dozen individuals on either side, according to sources from both sides of the conflict. With it, the Yugoslav wars had reached previously peaceful Macedonia. Background: when it declared its independence on 8 September 1991, Macedonia was the only ex-Yugoslav republic that managed to secede non-violently from the Federation. Because of this, Macedonia was considered one of the bright spots in the former Yugoslavia, although Macedonia seceded from Yugoslavia as one of the poorest republics. Socio-economic interventions undertaken by the consecutive democratically elected governments managed to improve the economic picture in the country. According to the International Crisis Group, there was nearly 3% growth in 1999. The second half of 2000 also saw steady growth, leading to a 5% GDP increase for the year. In January 2001, the government projected a budget surplus for the second year in a row. In 2000, the country's emerging middle class began buying new cars, adding extensions to apartments and planning summer vacations abroad. Although the ethnic Macedonian majority and the largest minority, the ethnic Albanians, have coexisted uneasily both before and after the country declared independence in 1991, their relations have generally been peaceful. All of the successive Macedonian governments have included Albanian parties as coalition partners, and all problems were resolved through political dialogue. The mood was more or less optimistic until the beginning of 2001. The main cause for incidents, though, was the repression by the Macedonian governments on the use of the Albanian language in Macedonia and the ban of the use of the Albanian flag. In 1997, the Constitutional Court forbade the use of Albanian flag, sparking protests. Albanian demands in Macedonia. According to the 1994 census, there were 442,914 Albanians in the Republic of Macedonia, making up for about 22.9% of the total population of the country. This makes them the largest ethnic minority alongside a majority Macedonian population of 1,288,330. The Albanians in Macedonia live in compact settlements in the western part of Macedonia, towards the border with Albania. They also live in the northwestern part, toward the border with Serbia and Kosovo, as well as in Skopje and Kumanovo. They comprise the majority of the population in the towns of Tetovo, Gostivar, and Abar. Since independence, the Republic of Macedonia had been trying to focus on its internal affairs. The promotion of democracy and harmonized inter-ethnic relations had been defined as the main goal of the new state. Since the first democratic elections in 1991, the Albanians in Macedonia used all constitutional and political opportunities to play a significant political role in the country. There were several Albanian political parties, whose behavior and rhetoric depended on whether they were in the governing coalition or not. Despite these political fluctuations, the Albanian parties were included as coalition partners in all post-communist Macedonian governments. members of the Albanian ethnic group, as well as members of the other nationalities living in Macedonia, enjoyed a high degree of human rights and protection of their ethnic, cultural, linguistic and religious identity. The latter was manifested through state-funded television programs that were broadcast in the Albanian language. Also, there were Albanian newspapers, primary and high school education was in the Albanian language, Albanian folklore festivals were organized, etc. Albanians also had representatives in the institutions of the system. Regardless of the existing socio-economic and political status, the Albanians in Macedonia as a whole began to demand greater political rights. These included making amendments to the constitution in order to declare the Albanians as a second titular nation of the country, recognizing Albanian as a second official language, and providing state support for the underground Albanian language university in Tavo. In contrast, Macedonians asserted that the Albanian minority enjoyed sufficient rights, comparable to or better than other minority communities in Europe. The Macedonians also remained suspicious of Albanian demands for autonomy, which they feared could lead to eventual secession or partition and unification with Albania or Kosovo. In 1994, some of the Albanian politicians in Macedonia radicalized their demands for collective political rights. The most extreme manifestation of these radical demands was the declaration in 1994 of an autonomous republic called Illyride, in the western part of Macedonia. Other pressing issues were the beginning of operation of the illegal university in the Albanian language in Tavo in 1995, as well as the anti-constitutional raising of the Albanian flag in front of the municipal assemblies in Gostivar and Tavo in 1997. Macedonians considered these two events as steps towards creation of parallel authorities of the Albanians in Macedonia and the Kosovo Crisis. During the conflict in Kosovo in 1999, Macedonia opened its borders to thousands of Kosovo Albanian refugees who were fleeing into the country. According to figures released by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, on the 17th of May there were 229,300 Kosovo Albanian refugees in Macedonia. The number of Albanian refugees in Macedonia at that stage was more than 11% of the country's population. According to the US, Macedonia's ability to receive refugees was limited, because contingency planning assumed only 20,000 refugees. Despite all the difficulties, Macedonia accepted refugees according to international standards until the end of the war. The burden of having to address the needs of 360,000 refugees took its toll on Macedonia's economy. Instead of experiencing modest growth as projected for 1999, the Macedonian economy shrank by as much as 10% of GDP for the rest of 1999. Trade with FR Yugoslavia, Macedonia's main trading partner, had collapsed, causing Macedonia to lose one of its most important export markets and a vital source of raw materials. Consequently, a number of factories had to close down, adding to already high unemployment. At the same time, the main transit route for Macedonian exports to most of Europe had been closed, increasing the costs for exports. State coffers, almost empty before the outbreak of the crisis, were now practically exhausted. Macedonians were worried about the impact that more than 360,000 Albanian refugees might have on Macedonia's own ethnic mix. They were afraid that the refugees' presence could disturb the republic's demographic balance. Macedonians were worried about the possible destructive spillover effects that could result from the newest phase of the Kosovo conflict, and also feared that they had the most to lose. As a Chicago Tribune journalist stated in March 1999, people are afraid that after Kosovo comes Macedonia. At the same time, insurgents from the Kosovo Liberation Army began crossing the border and entrenching themselves in Albanian-populated municipalities of the Republic. Macedonian authorities frequently intercepted and seized weapons deliveries en route to Kosovo. Initial NLA attack. In the prelude to the conflict in late 2000, groups of armed Albanians started opening fire on Macedonian police and security forces located on the border with FR Yugoslavia. These events appeared to catch the Macedonian government and the international community by surprise. The first attacks occurred in the small village of Tanisevci located in northern Macedonia, near the border with Kosovo. The conflict began on the 22nd of January 2001, when a group of armed Albanians attacked the police station of the village Tias near Tavo, killing a police officer and injuring 3 others. Arban Hafri, leader of the Democratic Party of Albanians, which was a part of the Macedonian government, criticized the attack against the police station and said the following: "The Tavo incident is a part of an orchestrated action against the government and a very crude attempt to overthrow it. Regardless of who is behind it, as a political party we deeply condemn this act. This is a deeply anti-Macedonian act, but also an act against the interests of the Albanians in Macedonia." In the same month, a group calling itself the National Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the attacks against the police. Initial reports gave conflicting information about the NLA. Macedonian President Boris Trajkovski claimed that the rebels were primarily Kosovo Liberation Army members who had infiltrated the country from Kosovo. Macedonian officials accused NATO of not doing enough to disarm the Albanian insurgents, discouraging their encampment in the buffer zone area between Kosovo and Serbia, or preventing their entry into Macedonia. The NLA claimed that the rebel force comprised several thousand men, coming mainly from Macedonia. After a month of clashes, by late February, the Macedonian special police units neutralized the positions of the NLA in Tias and Tanisevci, temporarily driving them across the border into Kosovo. Fighting in Tavo. In the middle of March, NLA forces reappeared in the hills above Tavo, a key northwest Macedonian town with an ethnic Albanian majority. The insurgents fired down on Macedonian positions using rifles, machine guns and mortars. At that point the NLA controlled at least 7 villages to the north and west of Tavo, all of which were up in the mountains and easily defensible. On the 22nd of March 2001, tensions soared further in Tavo, when 2 Albanian men, a father and a son, were shot dead during a routine search at a police checkpoint. The incident began when the car was stopped and a police officer saw the younger Albanian move something in his pocket. Fearing it was a grenade, the officer panicked and ran. The Albanian exited the car, dropped to his knees, and threw the grenade in the direction of the running policeman. It landed at his feet but failed to explode. At the moment the grenade was thrown, a cordon of Macedonian troops, positioned behind sandbags, unleashed a volley of gunfire at the Albanian. At first he slumped against the car, then fell on the curb, dead. Moments later the father was also shot as he tried to run from the car. The NLA unit's strategic position allowed them to have an overview of the town. The front line between the NLA and the Macedonian security forces expanded along the wooded hills adjacent to the city center to the north. The same day a front opened in Tavo. The NLA took control of the medieval city fortress north of the city center, and started shooting at police stationed in the urban areas. After the initial clash, the Macedonian police pushed the NLA out of Tavo and captured the medieval fortress. The NLA were pushed back into the surrounding hills where several houses were reportedly burning. Medical officials said 1 person was killed, and at least 14 injured, including 11 police officers. The government issued an ultimatum asking the National Liberation Army to lay down their arms and leave the country, or face a full-scale offensive. The NLA rejected the ultimatum, announced a unilateral ceasefire, and called for political dialogue. In response, President Trajkovski claimed that the government first had to neutralize the terrorist threat. but agreed to start a political dialogue with legitimate Albanian political parties in Macedonia. Prime Minister Ljubko Georgievski declared, in a televised speech to the nation, that he would not negotiate with terrorists. He rebuked the United States and Germany, whose troops patrolled the border from the Kosovo side as part of NATO's contingent there, for not doing enough to stop the rebels. Georgievski accused NATO of creating a new Taliban in Europe and allowing Albanian extremists to operate out of UN-administered Kosovo. Government's counteroffensive after 5 days of guerrilla attacks against government forces in and around Tavo. On 18 March 2001, the Macedonian government ordered a general mobilization of reservists in order to execute a wider counter-attack against the National Liberation Army's positions in the hills around Tavo. The offensive of the Macedonian security forces started on 25 March 2001. The offensive was launched against the NLA's positions on the hillsides overlooking the city. While encountering fierce resistance from the rebels, more than 200 troops, aided by tanks and mortars, advanced about a kilometer up the hills fighting their way towards the village of Gadra. By early afternoon the same day, the village of Gadra was captured by the police. The police entered Sipkovica, but the NLA insurgents put up stiffer resistance at Lavce. Macedonian government forces continued to move carefully to the north of Tavo during the second day of the offensive, consolidating their control of villages that had been held by Albanian rebels for almost 2 weeks. After the Macedonian security forces' artillery and infantry assault, most of the NLA insurgents had abandoned their positions farther north into the mountains stretching toward Kosovo. On 28 March 2001, 2 days after the NLA was driven out from the greater part of Tavo, Macedonian security forces launched a second offensive, this time directed at clearing the insurgents from their remaining strongholds stretching from east of Tavo to the village of Tanisevci, northwest of Skopje. During the second offensive, the security forces attacked the NLA positions near the villages of Brest, Malino Malo, Grakani and Gosens, where clashes had taken place earlier in March before the later clashes around Tavo. The government said the guerrillas fled northwest towards Kosovo, which they used as a rear base. On 31 March 2001, the Macedonian government announced an end of its offensive against the NLA armed groups. The Macedonian government claimed to have killed a dozen NLA guerrillas during the offensive. The rebels also claimed to have killed at least a dozen Macedonian border police. However, this was denied by security officials. Hospital officials in Tavo said 30 police officers and 10 civilians were wounded. 1 civilian, an Albanian man, was killed. NLA sources, however, confirmed that during the Tavo offensive of the Macedonian army they have lost 7 armed men. The NLA's dislodging from the hills above Tavo led to a month-long lull in the conflict escalation. During the 1-month-long calm period, a result of the offensive by Macedonian security forces, the government launched roundtable discussions with Macedonian and Albanian political parties on legislative reforms. However, this did not end the violence. On 28 April 2001, 8 Macedonian police officers were killed in the Vejsa massacre in an NLA ambush, and the bodies were mutilated. Reports concluded that the attackers must have been informed by radio about the route of the police vehicle. Macedonian sources disclosed that the ambush was executed by Ismail Shnazi, Sika Ilaz and Sika Bilal, all 3, and most of their people were born in Kosovo and were veteran members of the Kosovo Liberation Army. Sika Bilal was a member of the Kosovo Intelligence Agency and was one of the main organizers for weapons smuggling in Kosovo. In reference to the attack, Macedonian President Boris Trajkovski stated, "We are fighting terrorists, not rebels, and we have exercised the utmost restraint in tackling them." The murder of the 8 Macedonian soldiers and police officers led to riots in Skopje, Bitola and Veles, during which ethnic Macedonians attacked Albanian-owned businesses and shops. At least 10 Albanian shops in the city of Bitola were destroyed, and dozens of buildings were damaged. In order to suppress the riots, the Macedonian government imposed a curfew in Bitola, and Premier Georgievski announced that his cabinet considered declaring a state of war in order to have greater flexibility in fighting the NLA insurgents. According to the Macedonian constitution, a state of war would give enhanced powers to the president and the army, and allow for presidential rule by decree, fewer restraints on the army, the banning of demonstrations, a nationwide curfew, and sealing the country's borders. However, during the entire conflict, the United States urged Macedonia not to declare a state of war in its fight against the NLA.